looks like Disney's Mulan live-action remake is being released. So how's about we completely ignore that and talk about the original animated movie released in 1998 instead? Mulan marks a shift in storytelling for Disney. Developing Asian-themed legends was something that Walt Disney Feature Animation Florida wanted to do since 1989. Alright, so when it comes to Western animation adapting Asian stories, Mulan is a little meh. But when it comes to writing their own story based on the legend, which is what Disney is good at, this movie to me is one of the best, and perhaps it was ahead of its time. Seen as Disney's most progressive Disney film, even though Mulan herself is not a princess, she is part of the princess lineup for some reason. Mulan is a quirky but intelligent woman who's trying hard to fit into a society which tells her in order to bring honor to her family, she must be a good wife and daughter while under pressure to be a good porcelain doll. Though the movie is a little soulless when it comes to depicting Chinese culture, although I'm not pretending to be an expert on Chinese culture at any means, it pulls a lot of inspiration from the silent film era and goes for a more comedic tone when it comes to storytelling, at least in comparison to, say, The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast, for instance. I have no clue how the Chinese see this movie, but I'm guessing it's similar to how I feel about Pixar's Brave. Yeah, I know I've talked about this movie to death, and I think talking about it again will finally run this subject into the ground, but yeah, Brave and Mulan have a lot in common in regards to attempting to be progressive. Mulan herself to me is far braver than Merida in the fact that Mulan disguised herself and went to war to save her father. Merida turned her mother into a bear so she didn't have to get married. Okay, so Merida had far more responsibilities than Mulan, since Merida is a princess, but culturally speaking, the pressure on both characters to be a certain way to uphold their family honor was immense and on a similar level. I feel tonally things are different because although they are of similar age, Mulan is far more mature, intelligent, and selfless than Merida is. Not only did she risk her life, she gave up her entire identity to do so. And for a movie that is about identity at its center, both these movies do reflect and mirror each other in some ways. Just Mulan was far better executed and didn't resort to making jokes about the nation or the culture. At least not in my opinion, although it did resort to making cross-dressing jokes. But anyway, I do bring up these two movies for another reason. Apparently in the early days of production, Disney had two choices between making a movie based on Mulan or a movie based on a Scottish folktale that featured a dragon. Yeah, I think DreamWorks nabbed that idea. Originally meant to be like a Tootsie romantic comedy, because everyone remembers Tootsie, right? Thank goodness they didn't go down that route. Mulan is about how we see ourselves and also how we want to be seen. It's a movie about identity and knowing our place in society while also seeing the flaws in it and doing something about it to make a change. All Mulan wants, though, is to be allowed to be herself and to make her father proud. Though the movie does have a more comedic tone with the storytelling, it doesn't cheapen the seriousness of it either when it needs to be. It alleviates the audience with a joke when needed without it feeling forced. It's to break the heavy dramatic tension. I personally think the movie does a great job at keeping a balance between drama and comedy, even if some moments do leave you with a little bit of emotional whiplash. But that's nothing new from Disney, they've been doing that since the 40s. Also, I have to mention the reference to the painting American Gothic here when the ancestors warn about losing the farm. That's brilliant. What can I say? I'm an art nerd. Most famously, the first scene of the film to be put to animation and what was used as the teaser for the movie, if my memory serves me right, was what's called Sequence 6, when Mulan makes the decision to leave home and go to war to save her father. This scene is done entirely in pantomime. There are faces looking down at her in every scene. Might it be the ancestral stones on the furniture, on the walls, or even her own reflection in her father's sword as she cuts her hair. Probably the most blatant symbol of her cutting ties with her old identity and changing from Mulan to Ping, at least mentally speaking. It's amazing how cutting hair can also change your jawline dramatically. I'm sorry, I just had to point out how the jawline on Mulan changes here. It's hilarious. There is actually a face on her father's sword too, kind of like they're symbolizing how the ancestors are watching her and how her family may be judging her, at least in her own head. She leaves without a kiss or leaving a note, as that's not the Chinese culture, and I think some people may have had a problem with that. It may seem a little bit heartless. Instead, she leaves a comb on the side table and leaves in the middle of the night. Keep in mind, she's doing this knowing that she will probably be killed at war. The Emperor says to call up all reserves as many recruits as possible, because one man may be the difference between victory and defeat. Symbolically talking about Mulan. She is a single grain of rice that tips the scale and ultimately saves China. Remember, this movie began with Mulan preparing herself for an arranged marriage to bring honor to her family and to please her future in-laws, whoever they may be. Yeah, unlike Merida, Mulan is more than willing to go through with an arranged marriage for the sake of her family. Oh, and this movie has a sequel. First rule about the Mulan sequel, we don't talk about the Mulan sequel. An arranged marriage for the princesses? How horrible, declares Mulan. You know, the thing that she was perfectly okay with doing in the first movie. Don't talk about the sequel, you know what happens when you do. My experience with this film is that it's one of the few animated movies I have watched with my dad and granddad that they genuinely enjoyed and paid attention to. I remember seeing this movie in my local cinema with my sister and how moving and funny the movie was to us. I was 12 years old when this movie came out, and it is still one of my top favourite animated movies ever made. Rewatching it as an adult, I appreciate how much this film stands out from other Disney movies, and yeah, it's deliberate that way. Here is a Disney movie that is smart, funny, moving, and the animation is stellar. Okay, yeah, obviously other Disney movies are just as smart, funny, and moving, but visually speaking, this movie is dramatically different. It manages to do this while also keeping things poetically simple, to coin a phrase from the producer of the film. The movie really is a ballad of colour which emphasises the emotional moments. The palette is limited, but it's also definite. I didn't know anything about the legend of Mulan when this movie came out, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert here either. I tend to focus more on the visual aspects of a film and how the stories and characters impact me as a person. Disney loves doing retreads of well-known Western children's classics, and this is Disney's first attempt away from well-known stories as it steps into Asian folktales. I think for me, this movie feels far more personal than any of the other Disney movies, primarily because it doesn't push a romantic love interest to the forefront. Keep in mind, pretty much every Disney animated movie before this point orbited around some sort of romantic interest. Here is a movie that focuses on the main character and her figuring out who she wants to be while living in a very strict world steeped in tradition where a woman can't even talk when in a man's presence without permission first. Mulan didn't leave her family for herself. She did it to save her father and to bring honor to her family, something that in her society women could only bring by finding a good match, something that Disney itself was constantly pushing. Thank you, Queen Elsa, for putting that horrible thing to bed. Someday my prince will come, part of your world, blah blah blah. Mulan is focusing more on who she is inside without factoring in a romantic love interest, and that to me is fantastic. Oh wait, yeah, she falls in love with Shang, never mind. Also, I should point out that Mulan saves Shang in this movie, and Shang repays the debt by not executing her when she is discovered to be a woman. The term the makers of the movie used to describe the visual journey of this movie was poetic simplicity, which I have said already, and I don't think there is any art form that is more simple or more poetic than calligraphy. Chinese painting and calligraphy emphasizes on motion charged with dynamic life, though to me Mulan doesn't do enough visually to tribute the nation and culture of China and the ancient art of calligraphy. The fact that it opens with this art form gives it a strong start. It's about energy and motion. It's not so much about the marks, but rather the movements you make to create them. I wish this movie did more to do with the art of China. It didn't really do that, and that to me is probably the movie's biggest weakness. Mulan is a movie, as I've said already, about identity. Might it be Mulan wanted to see someone worthwhile when she looked in a mirror, and Mushu wanting to be a legitimate guardian instead of a fraud, Cricky wanting to be a lucky bug, Shang wanting to prove to himself that he is a great captain. I could go on and on and on. One of the things that is used throughout this movie to symbolize identity is flags. Flags are used to mark an occasion or to gain attention or advise certain treatment and mood, but are also used as a statement to say this is who we are and this land belongs to us now. What is the first thing we see Shan Yu doing in this movie? Burning a flag. In other words, destroying China's identity by invading. Unlike most Disney movies or animated movies in general that tended to model themselves after one artist, you know, Gustav Tengrin for Snow White and Pinocchio, Tyrus Wrong for Bambi, Evan Earl for Sleeping Beauty, Mary Blair for Cinderella and Alice in Wonderland, Al Hirschfeld for Aladdin, Gerald Scarfe for Hercules. The point is, I could go on, but it was an ongoing tradition that one movie was modelled after one art style that was already pre-established. Mulan didn't have that, though if I did have to give this movie an artist, it would of course be Chen Yichang, who designed the look of the characters of the film. Mulan was allowed to grow and progress into its own style, not having one specific chosen artist to emulate. I do think that this is the movie's biggest strength. All the visual elements in the film are boiled down to their essence, making simple statements so that the little details in the visuals can really stand out. Most Disney animated movies are very detail oriented for their believability. I mean, just look at Hunchback of Notre Dame for a good example. The detail in the architecture here is emphasized because the cathedral is basically a character in itself in that movie. Mulan is about big shapes and small positive detail. Mulan's story is the big thing. There's a war, her father will die if he goes, so she is the small positive detail in the story. The small simple statement that stands out from everything else visually. There is a heavy contrast in the negative and positive spaces in this movie, which is combined with the simplicity of Chinese art. But I do feel that this is a little too subtle. I wish it could have pushed it a little bit further. Tonally, the film has a good balance to me. Okay, yeah, it does neck snap you from comedic moments right into horrific sight, like going from a girl worth fighting for right into a battlefield and destroyed village, but let's face it, Disney is known for its sudden tonal U-turns when it comes to horrific emotional moments. Perfect example being when Mushu accidentally ignites a cannon, hilariously blaming Cricky for it, but ultimately also igniting the battle scene between the new recruits and the Han army. Oh, Bambi's mother died? Here, have some happy birds singing about spring! Tra-la-la-la! I think this scene is a pivotal point in the film, because this is where Shang's story and Mulan's come together. The love they have for their fathers, what they are willing to give up to honor their families and their fathers, is what connects them initially. This isn't a movie about their romance. It can't really be about their romance, considering the situation they're in. They're literally in a war. Even Mushu, who should feel out of place, grows on us over time. Yeah, okay, it's clear that this is cast in the same tradition of Robin Williams' Genie in Aladdin. I do feel his street smart lingo juxtaposed to the anxious tone Mulan uses is great to me. It breaks the tension of the situation just enough while also showing him being sincere when he sees firsthand the devastation of this war he and Mulan are in together. Alright, so there is no dragon in the original legend, but I really don't care, and the fact that Mushu isn't in the Disney live action adaptation is kind of moot at this point. It's clearly trying to be more closer to the original legend, which I do respect, but I'm still not going to see the movie, though I highly doubt the Disney live action adaptation of Mulan will be any better than Mulan Rise of a Warrior, which is an amazing film based on the Mulan story that was made in 2009. Mushu may have started out as a self-serving fraud, but he came through when Mulan needed him, and he did confess his lie to her himself instead of it being found out or pressured into doing so. Okay, yeah, so this movie does fall into the trap of making inevitable cross-dressing jokes, and yeah, there is the obligatory awkward bathroom scene, but to me it's done tastefully enough and also serves as a connecting moment between the gang of three. I did feel that Cricky wasn't needed in this movie really. He just served as a sidekick for Mushu, and Mushu was already a sidekick for Mulan. Did we really need Cricky here? I don't know. A lot of the things he did, I think Mushu could have done on his own really. It was just to give Mushu someone to order around. Cricky had to work super hard to have any plot importance to me. True, without him, the matchmaker would not have spilt the tea or set herself on fire, but Mulan had already screwed up the matchmaker's test by writing the words of the admonition on her arm, ending up with the ink being smeared all over the matchmaker's face, which could be another possible cross-dressing joke, because it did look like a beard a little bit. Maybe. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into this. I do that a lot, huh? Mulan is a movie that means a lot to me because of how strong a female role model Mulan is, but I think it would be criminal not to mention how moving the ending is when she returns to her father. She presents him the sword of Shan Yu and the crest of the Emperor to honor the Fa family, but he just throws them on the floor and then embraces her. It's a wonderful, touching moment which still gets to me this day. It's a beautiful, simple movie with serious themes like war, honor, and identity, served up with clever comedy and beautiful animation. Poetic simplicity, indeed. I'm Mad Munchkin. Stay creative.